Observation 1 is resolutional analysis. They support as resolution. I don't even remember what it is. Something about orbital debris. The first argument under the framework is that fiat is an act of imagination necessarily allowed to both teams access the debate and the framework do not reciprocity and should be rejected. 2. The affirmative team has the right to find the resolution reasonably through the use of parametrics with the burden of proving the resolution through. 3. Policy net benefit is the best criteria for the debate as allows both teams access to predictable burdens and methods of refutation. 4. Discursive implications can be evaluated through the framework of the affirmative if the methodology of the plan is flawed. The implication of the criticism must be a direct effect of the plan's passage. 5. Due to the fact that all words have a multiplicity of meaning unless the affirmative interpretation is shown to exclude the negative without being accepted in order to avoid silencing the PMC. 6. The PMC is silenced through competing interpretations of premises. The discursive implications are more immediate must be paramount over the PMC discursive errors. Observation 2 is the background. The first argument here is that orbital debris, like space junk, so like shit's up there, it's floating around, we don't really have control over it, it's a bad thing. It's stuff like spent rocket stages, defunct satellites, we're worried about it. The second argument of the background is that we can only, the only protection that we have right now for things like the International Space Station is for protection against debris that is less than 1 centimeter in diameter, and that anything larger than that we have to maneuver to get away from it because it carries too much kinetic energy, we're not able to stop it with the shielding that we have right now. The third argument is that tracking only works for objects that are greater than 5 centimeters in size. There are about 600,000 pieces smaller than 5 centimeters in size out in the atmosphere right now, and there are 22,000 pieces that are larger than softball. The fourth argument here is that this is a threat to space exploration. Essentially, we can't do space exploration if we're just going to get blown up when we get up there by all the space junk. The observation 3 is the plan. The United States federal government, through an act of Congress signed by the President, will direct 20% of NASA's current budget to the development and use of remotely controlled vehicles that collect and deposit smaller debris. The United States federal government, through an act of Congress signed by the President, will direct 20% of NASA's current budget to the development of and use of remotely controlled vehicles that collect and deposit smaller debris. Observation 4 is the solvency. The first argument here is that NASA just got a change to their budget that's larger now. So like NASA's got the money to do this. They're going to have the capital that's going to be able to reinvest in this. The second argument here is they can look to Project Ortiz that's being run by the United States Air Force as the only that determined that this was the only cost-effective option other than shooting a laser up there, which they decided they didn't really want to do because you do things like fry birds. The third argument here is that the 2007 guideline for rocket launches changed it so the debris allowed is no longer important because it drifts to the periphery. It means that there's not going to be any new junk. We just need to clean up the junk that's already there. Thus, advantage 1. Space junk. They suppose the increase. The first argument here is that there is lots of space junk up there. You can look at the background. The second argument here is that there are 700 operational satellites in orbit right now. And the third argument here is that Kessler syndrome. That when I can't remember what Kessler syndrome is. Yeah, there's like a cascade effect, like shit gets hit, it blows up, it sends debris everywhere, and then it kills other shit. It's a pretty big problem. The fourth argument here is that there is no deployed method right now being used to check against the debris that's already up there, so we're at significant risk right now. The fifth argument is the cascade effect. Kessler syndrome must have been different, man. The piece of point is the length. The first argument here is that all new launches are at risk right now because when they go up there, they're at risk of being hit by these 600,000 pieces of debris that we can't track. The second argument here is that our shit's at risk and we need to do something to solve it. The affirmative plan does that. Like, we send stuff up there to catch all that little junk and throw it out. The CISA point of the internal links, the first argument here is that the cascade effects is going to be checked back for because the point at which there are no new collisions and that we have the ability to clean up this junk, then they are not going to be facing the risk of that. The second argument is that this debris is traveling 10 times faster than a bullet right now, that this debris has the ability to cause massive damage. The third argument is that this destruction of satellites is inevitable as a result because when we aren't able to track this, it's only a matter of time before we hit another satellite and it just gets worse from there. The fourth argument is that GPS signal is going to be key to a modern economy, that it supports many aspects of the economy. The D support of the impacts. The first argument here is disaster response. The little a is they can look to terrestrial communications failing after disasters, specifically to following 9/11. The terrestrial communications in New York were down. The only way that you could actually get messages out of New York was through satellite. Then you can also look to Katrina and Hurricane Haiyan and the like, where terrestrial communications are literally torn off the face of the planet by these hurricanes, and the only thing that we can do is use satellites because they're high enough up that they're actually impacted by this. The little b under this is that satellites are the only technology that is going to be able to solve for larger areas. You can't use things like shortwave radios in disaster areas because if you're spread out over 20 miles and the range of your radio is only 5 miles, you're not going to be able to communicate with the resources that you need to be able to get around. You can look to the example of Louisiana where it was too spread out and radios weren't effective. You needed to have satellite phones in order to be able to distribute the disaster response. The little c is that this is going to be key to the response because we need to organize and coordinate the resources that are being sent out in order to be able to use them effectively. You can look to emergency control centers that are able to direct all of the resources, or else people are going to fall to the periphery, that people who are difficult to find are not actually going to be helped. The little d is that this is disproportionately going to kill people at the periphery because these populations have fewer resources to handle these things and they're not insulated by the wealth, so they don't have the ability to get out of these areas. It means that we are necessarily going to be killing poor people most when we don't have satellites.
Structural balance?
The little e is that caused structural violence. When we only kill poor people, it's probably fucked up and we should stop it. Advantage 2, satellite intelligence. Basic point is the uniqueness. The first argument here is that intelligence is intelligence right now is preventing global war right now, that the intelligence that we have is the only thing that is able to check back against aggression. The second argument here is that drones are key to being able to prevent conventional war. You can look specifically to like a Black Hawk Down scenario where when we see aircraft falling in foreign countries that we have to send ground insurgencies in to be able to get those individuals back out, and that drones are going to be key to be able to check back against this because it means that we don't actually have people that are at risk. The third argument here is that we use this to be able to monitor other states, which is going to be key because we can watch things like troop movements and check against escalation when we have the ability to see them and know that missiles aren't moving. The fourth argument here is that this is a threat to the International Space Station at the point at which the space station is up there with the space junk. If space junk hits it, people are going to die. The piece of point is linked. The first argument here is that we need to maintain our satellites. The second argument here is that we create, say, multilateral diplomacy through means of the ISS, because when we're protecting them, we're also protecting all of the individuals who are up there from other countries. Right now is going to be key, especially to U.S.-Russia relations, because of the tensions that are very high right now. The CISO point of the impacts. The first argument is that U.S. hedge is going to be key to check global war. You can look specifically to Japan and China's dispute over the Spratly Islands that has been checked back against by the U.S. Protectorate, and the Taiwan Security Agreement that's been able to check back against Chinese aggression there as well. The little a is that satellites provide secure communications for things like weather and navigation data that is going to be key to the operations of the military, because when the military doesn't know what's ahead of them, then they don't know where to go. The little b is that we're going to be able to monitor ballistic missile launches that is only happening through satellites, and it also empowers things like nuclear forensics, allows us to tell who is detonating bombs that blow up and who built them. The little c is that we're going to be able to track military movements. You can look specifically to Iraq, where we track them with satellites, and that's why the conventional war with Iraq ended so quickly. Little d is that you can look to unpersoned aerial vehicles are going to provide air dominance and prevent conventional war.
And the order is going to be 3 off, and then the aft case in order.
Do I need the top case?
Starting with context, yeah.
Cool.
So we'll be talking about the topic.
I always appreciate it.
Yeah.
Whatever that is.
Yeah. There's no restrictions.
So I actually only need 3 sheets.
Yeah, you actually just need 3 sheets.
That's fair. Oh, that's if you do the top case. It's easy to answer that.
Yeah.
Ready, Emily?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
First off, it's going to be unemployment benefits. The unemployment benefits is passing in the status quo is the ace of point the uniqueness. Number 1 says that it's passing in the status quo. This is indicated for a few reasons. Right now, there's currently unemployment benefits are cut, leaving millions of Americans in the cold. The next argument says that the retired, Reed and Boehner are both issues saying is that they're supporting the bill, which is bringing the mainstream Republicans and the Democrats together and creating a coalition between the House and the Senate, which has been really rare these days. But they've also been working with the Labor Secretary together, meaning that both parties are working with the same source of information. The next argument right now is that the public support is right now huge for the bill, which is why the mainstream Republicans are trying to get behind the bill. The piece of points links is that number 1 is a plan is a Democrat is the plan is a is a Democrat win. The Democrats are big on solidarity with the Obama space funding. The number 2 says that the plan saps Obama's political capital because he will be retracting his rhetoric on decreasing spending, which he literally just said in the Union address. The next argument says the plan gives the GOP momentum for a smear campaign against Obama for his contradicting rhetoric. The next argument says that Paul Ryan says that the only funding restored to NASA must be for rocket launches. The next argument says that the plan pisses off the Democrats by decentralizing.
The support. It decentralizes the
support. By decentralizing support, the next argument says that the plan assesses the plan causes the space backlash. 60 points. The internal links is that the number 1 is going to be the economy. People will be millions of people will be losing their job, but also unemployment benefits for not even having a job. Meaning this will lead to a number of impact scenarios. The ace of points says that they won't even be able to have the choice between food or medicine. They won't have the choice at all. We isolate that this is the worst form of dehumanization and the worst form of structural violence, and will always circumvent your impact that you try to go for in structural violence, because it's literally something that we are refusing to pass for these people that can immediately have solvency for them. Your plan trips out into the reverses and creates more structural violence within the United States society, but also this leads to starvation and also leads to an impetus of economic collapse, because this will be a lot less job growth and production into the GDP, which will cause investor flight. And investor flight investments are already tenuous with Merkel giving us a AA credit rating. You will hold a high threshold on the amount of investment loss that could actually trip up the double dip recession, which we argue will lead to starvation and impetus for resource wars, because investment would be terminally lost, which means we'd have to go into scenarios like Arctic and fight over resources, because we would not be able to terminally check back, because investors would fly. The next office is going to be disadvantage on Chinese nationalism. The ace point is that Chinese nationalism is increasing the status quo, but the U.S. relations are stable but incredibly delicate. We have a few reasons or means to prove this. The number one is that there are currently a hole in the Great Wall of pragmatism found in China, and that is found when the West pushes its ideologies and policies within what the China considers their sphere of influence, i.e., how when the West sent battleships in the Mediterranean Sea to push the Syria peace talks for the rebels and for Assad to step down, the Chinese nationalists literally sent battleships and a marine cruiser to the Mediterranean Sea. This is where you isolate the hole in the wall of pragmatism. The next argument says that the Chinese nationalism has no respect for life. The next point talks about how they literally killed 80 million people of their own citizens to date. But little B talks about the current pollution problem going on in China, where they're not solving the smog. They literally just put up movie screens in city squares that has a sunset and sunrise. The third point talks about how the China is developing the ASAT technology, which is anti-satellite missiles, because they consider that the next militarized frontier and part of their sovereignty. The next argument says that President Xi Jinping is sliding with the nationalist politicians. This is according to Joseph Chang from the University of Hong Kong. Xi is consolidating power for the nationalists. This is indicated by a lot of warrants. But moreover, what this is causing is destroying the Communist Party for the first time in many decades. The ace of point talks about how Gordon Chang, a Washington D.C. consultant for China, said that the party is tearing itself apart. This is indicated by the fact that President Xi has arrested 20 politicians for corruption, but they've all conveniently been moderate politicians consolidating more power for the nationalists. The beast of point talks about how Xi is the most aggressive land-grabbing leader that China has ever had in decades. This is indicated by the Philippines and the James Sheldon Malaysia, and by the Senkaku you isolate in your own internal links. The fourth point, the next point talks about how Xi currently is in a temporary experiment with the United States over collaboration. The eighth point talks about how he's been dealing with Obama over the cyber tax and how they've been meeting over this, but it's incredibly tenuous right now, their relations, and if the experiment fails, then the power will immediately go to the nationalist rhetoric. The beast of point talks about that. The plan pisses off the nationalists. The first argument is that the plan hijacks the investments and the perceived sovereignty of China. The little A talks about how the nationalists see it as their next frontier. This is according to the press for Professor Wang of Hong Kong. They will see this as the United States militarizing and leading way to their militarizing of space. This is probably best indicated by the fact that we no longer have NASA as a program, and they would just see it as not a NASA thing, but just militarizing space. The second point talks about how the plan kills Xi's political capital, and he will be folding to the nationalists because it will prove that the nationalists were correct on the United States the entire time. The third link talks about how the nationalists would consider an act of war. This is best indicated by New Lee, one of the key nationalist politicians, said that any act of like clearing space, any act of the United States actually like trying to militarize space would be an act of war and would demand immediate reaction. The next point talks about how China made a plea that information must be first acted upon by a community. Any other any unilateral action taken in space will circumvent what they've been talking to the UN, which is we just all come together as a community and actually talk about the information and mapping out this problem. Sixth point is the internal links is that this will piss off the China. This will cause war. The number one argument talks about how the nationalists would demand immediate action, and what this will also cause is they would launch an ASAT within space to declare that this is also part of their sovereignty. And they did this in 2007. It sent thousands and thousands of debris, much worse than just colliding a satellite. This leads to a number of impacts. Is that this will lead to a Kessler effect. The United States will not have any U.S. satellites. You can cross-apply your their own internal links as to how this only checks back Senkaku, which is why Senkaku would happen, is because they would have a new found confidence within attacking Senkaku. This is indicated by a few reasons. Examiral Zhu of the Naval Defense Institute of China is incredibly arrogant. He thinks the Senkaku War would only last a few days because Japan would fold. That is absolutely arrogant to the fact that the United States would have to defend Japan out of the defense treaty that they have with Japan. But this is also nullified by the fact that that they would be more arrogant about their attack on Senkaku, by the fact that the U.S. will not have any more satellites because of the ASATs that they already threw into space. This would probably be enough impetus to trigger the war, which would always go nuclear because China would have no other choice because they wouldn't be able to fight them. So therefore, the counterplan. The USFG will enter into genuine prior binding consultation with China about the plan. The USFG will enter into a genuine prior and binding consultation with China about the plan. The competition is number one, is net benefits, and number two is intrinsic, is bad for debate. This is the only way you can actually print this, which would lead to fairness in education. Fairness in education issue solvency is that China would say yes, this would approve Z's collaboration has been working. Number two is that China would say yes, Z would use it to leverage to get more oil, and he's on the Council of A, which means he would probably just use it to get leverage more oil within Africa. The number three is that this solves the affirmative plan better because this leads to more information sharing on your solvency.
Status.
Number one is the ESA is solving because they're mapping out information sharing, which is preventing a future collision conditional. Number two is the U.S. Intelligence and Space Agency are creating spacecraft to destroy before it hits the atmosphere. The number three is that Russia is investing $2 billion to solve for the 600 defunct websites. The number four is the UN and US are working together to the Outer Space Treaty, which is actually solving back.
What was the status of the
Condo.
The order
Mm-hmm.
is going to be, let's do case on top, the solvency first, then advanced one, then advanced two.
Okay.
Politics, China decide, China counterplan, you sheet on bottom.
Sorry, I was missing what you said.
Case, solvency, advanced one, advanced two. Politics, China decide, China counterplan, you sheet on bottom.
You said China politics, counterplan?
Politics, China decide, counterplan.
You're saying you shoot on bottom.
I did say you sheet on bottom. Sorry, there's no way to write it, just use that.
Okay, ready?
Everybody ready?
Yeah.
Okay. On status results position, you are not going to be giving them any access. First, you can look to our analysis where we tell you that not only is has this expansion of space to be increased in the status quo, but also you can look to the analysis where we tell you that all of this is that there's been no action in the status quo. You can look to all of our analysis that says that not only is NASA taking any action with us, so that there's no other ability that no one else has been pursuing the exact technology that would solve. You can look to where specifically solve the arguments on Project Ortiz, where we tell you this is the only cost-effective mechanism to resolve this issue. All of your analysis about Russia, the United Nations, and US working together have no bearing on Project Ortiz, which is our plan to utilize these remote vehicles to remove. All of your arguments about how space debris is going to be resolved in status quo don't solve. This means all of it means that we still get access to all of our solvency arguments. Good? Advantage one. Just go straight and see. I want you to extend across specifically the arguments about how action now is going to be necessary in order to resolve the space debris, or we are going to be getting time frame differential. Where we're saying the consultation is going to take enough time to say that this is still going to be allowed for the Russian satellites, which is going to take out all of our communication ability. Our argument is that a disaster could happen tomorrow that's going to destroy our satellites, and this would still be able to lead to all these indirect impacts. We say this is going to lead to dispatch to counterplan. Image two. I want you to look to specifically how we tell you the satellites are necessary in order to be able to check back against any kind of conventional war. This means the case is a necessary internal link to resolve any of your Chinese nationalism arguments, which means that only the plan resolves any risk of conventional war. You look to all objectives analysis says that these satellites are necessary in order to not only check against the risk of like conventional conflict, but also allows us to check like nuclear forensics, check the movement of conventional forces. All these arguments check against your China arguments, which means when we beat the counterplan, this means that your arguments go. Now we solve both of these. Politics. The first argument is that passage is inevitable. You look at the fact that both sides need to pass new unemployment benefits. Our argument here is that if the Republicans don't pass this, it's necessarily going to destroy them in the midterm elections because of the fact that all individuals that such as the poor people which are individuals in socioeconomic disadvantages are already traditionally affected by to the Democrats would necessarily have to come out to vote if they don't get their unemployment benefits. Our argument means that this passage is inevitable. Our second argument is that it's not going to pass for a while. Our argument here is that there's been a dispute within the parties, and there's a split in the status quo that's preventing the passage of unemployment benefits. Our argument is that people are focusing on things like comprehensive immigration reform and other aspects that's going to prevent passage for the immediate period. Our third argument is that the plan causes this to pass faster. Our argument here is the little a, you the fact that this is going to break the gridlock in Congress, that everyone's focusing on immigration reform and status quo instead by passing this new legislation is going to allow for a greater look at the overall strategy and rather the overall effect of the entire national agenda as opposed to just this one aspect of immigration will be. So you can see this is going to show Democratic cooperation with Republicans. Our argument here is that this is not going to be new spending, but rather we're reallocating existing funding, which means that Obama is going to get a plus in this instance by showing and working with the existing rhetoric and working with Republicans. This means it's going to allow for Obama to push through unemployment benefits faster. It's going to allow for us to resolve this issue. The fourth argument is that faster unemployment benefits is good. The little a, you can put the fact that it's going to allow more people in access to the money they need in the status quo and going to increase consumer spending. Our argument is that this consumer spending is necessary for the economy because of the fact that you can look to 1/3 of the economy is made up of consumer spending. Consumer spending is decreased and necessary to result in to increase the economy overall. The fifth argument is that there's no link to this, that no one cares about space overall. You can look to the fact that this is not a major policy agenda for either side, and the fact that this has not been utilized and it doesn't help either side in the midterm elections necessarily means that no one cares about space. Additionally, sixth is that there's no link to this. All of your arguments about Republican backlash come as a result of spending increases. They say that Republicans are going to smear Obama for going back on this rhetoric in the State of the Union. Our argument is that we are reallocating existing funding means that there's no link to this position. The seventh argument here is we can turn that we're making Republicans happy. All of your arguments are that new access to space should only be for rockets. But our argument here is that we need to remove debris in order to allow for rocket launches. Look to all Objects analysis says we have to remove the debris to the periphery in order to be able to remove it, in order to be able to get new rocket launches. It means that we make Republicans happy by doing the plan. The eighth argument here is that there's. Am I good here?
Yeah, just move on.
Okay.
We're clearly collapsing in China.
Probably.
China. 6 minutes on it.
China just said.
I see.
The first argument here is that you can look to nationalism, increase is inevitable. You can look to all their analysis says the nationalist agenda is increasing the status quo. There's no check against this in status quo. All your arguments are going to come down to relations, which is necessary internally to all of this scenario. The second argument here is that U.S.-China relations are low in status quo. The little A's, you can notice the Senkaku Island dispute. China's been very angry that the United States has been backing China been backing Japan on China's territorial disputes to the Senkaku Islands. The little B's, you can notice the fact relations are low because the Dalai Lama, you can notice the fact that the United States visited the Dalai Lama visited the United States this week, and China expressed extreme outrage over this fact because of the fact that it looks like the United States is supporting Tibet, which has been a policy priority for China for many years. These arguments mean that United States-China relations are low in status quo. This means that all of the arguments for nationalism are not going to matter. Additionally, the next argument is going to turn that we actually increase United States-China relations. The little A's, you can notice the fact that China wants to remove space debris. You can notice the fact that in October of 2013, China sent a vehicle similar to what's planned into space in order to remove certain defunct satellites. That means that they want to remove space debris. It means that we are going to be helping China in the status quo. Additionally, in second argument here, so you can move the turn that the plan actually reverses the current rhetoric. Your politics arguments all talk about how the policy of the status quo right now is rocket launches, which are viewed as militarism. Our argument here about by removing debris as opposed to this is going to necessarily allow for a greater cooperation over space as a whole, and going to allow for greater protection of the ISS. Additionally, the third is you can go to the turn that's going to be that the plan protects the ISS, which is the necessary of the internal diplomacy. You can cross-apply our arguments from Van should talk about how the ISS is necessary to allow for diplomacy between multiple countries and create a safe space of discussion and allow it's a visible sphere of access. You know what I'm saying? It's a visible symbol to show cooperation. Additionally, on the internal links, first, there's no risk of attack of China launching an ASAT. The fact that this would lead to a massive international backlash. You can look to both Russia and India have been expanding their space cooperation. Necessarily means that they would backlash against China. There's no reason why and China would never piss off the entire world as a result of this. Additionally, you look to the fact that the last argument here is that the case solves the internal link to this. The case is necessarily, you look to all of our analysis says that satellites are necessary to resolve the internal link to prevent conventional conflict as a result of being able to watch troop movements, be able to prevent access through diplomacy. This means that the plan solves the internal link to your impacts. Good? Sure. Counterpoint. Our first argument here is that China is going to say no. You can look at the fact that that the United States and China have low relations in status quo, and it means there's no impetus for cooperation. Additionally, the second argument here is you can look at the fact that China wants to do this on our own. You can look at the fact that they've been they sent a vehicle into space in 2013 in order to remove space debris. Means that they want to do it on their own, not with the United States cooperation. Means that they would say no. Additionally, the third argument here is that they just said to the counter plan that they don't saw that there's a time frame differential. You can look to our analysis on the case debate. It says that attack could happen in the status quo, and this now say it would still be an attack. Now this would still destroy the satellites in the status quo, and the consultation would take a long period of time. Additionally, the fourth argument here is the permutation. You can do the plan and consult China. You can do the plan and consult China. Our little A's that we can consultation is the only thing that you actually is key necessary. That cooperation is no reason why we need to have prior and genuine consultation. Additionally, little B here says shields the link to the decided. This would necessarily result the internal links to all of your impacts. Yes.
Disad, this fucking says that China's sphere is all of space. We're not going to give space to China. That's
yeah,
fucked
additionally,
up.
decided the counterplan, we said that you're going to be destroying the United States hegemony as a result of giving space, the entirety of space to China by saying that it's entirely of China's control. Our argument here is that this is going to necessarily destroy the United States hegemony because it eliminates our ability to control a major aspect of new resources and assets necessarily to means that you still internally impact where our hedge impacts.
Thank you. That's the articulation.
There you go. We figured you don't care about combat.
Well, really, I don't care about combat,
There you
so...
go.
Okay.
I'm open.
Okay, order is going to be counterplan, China nationalism, unemployment.
Sneaky. I fucked up. That was my fault.
Sorry, you just tempted me too much when you went for China. Okay, and then advantage 2, advantage 1, background sheet.
Really, you shouldn't know what you're going to kick until that speech,
Yes.
so.
I don't know.
I don't know what I'm thinking until after.
Corey doesn't know what he's going to kick into.
Who cares? Alright,
Sorry, I missed the order because I was just...
because you were like, damn,
I was
okay.
screwing around
Alright.
again.
Counterplan,
You always
China
are.
nationalism.
Okay, so counterplan, China nationalism, unemployment,
Okay.
advantage 2, advantage 1, background page.
Advantage 2, advantage 1, background page.
Yeah,
That's strange.
I know.
Did we see anything on the background page?
Advantage 2, advantage 1 back. I didn't get that part.
Oh,
Oh, I-
it's
well,
like the
that
background
makes
solvency page, yeah.
Gotcha.
Whatever.
That makes a lot more sense. Okay.
The first page you
I'm
read
no longer
from.
lost, we're good.
Okay, cool. Everybody ready?
Mm-hmm.
Now go for the counterplan, no offense, you can go for it. China nationalism. You have arguments on the internal links about how there's no risk because China's not going to go for any kind of mass backlash. Instead, this argument, no offense, you can go for it on the sheet. Unemployment. You say that the passage of this is inevitable, however, in a world where you miss the ones of arguments talking about how this is actually a bipartisan effort in the status quo because they're actually looking at a coalition, which is always increasing the bipartisanship. In a world where you fracture the bipartisanship, it means that in a world where they've already accepted the risk of the unemployment benefits expiring. We're talking about the extension here. Currently, in the status quo, people are already without the unemployment benefits, meaning clearly the Republican Party doesn't really care if people are without the Republican benefits, which means that your passage of the argument doesn't really work because they would have already triggered the midterms links. Clearly, the Republicans don't care about this. But additionally, you can extend across versus analysis in the yellow talking about how there's this coalition where they're talking about the labor secretary, which means the outside administration is getting involved in the status quo because it's actually fostering so much bipartisanship, which means it's on the top of the docket. You say CIR is on the docket. That's funny considering CIR has actually been fractured in the status quo, which means that this is actually the number one thing in the world where the labor secretary is actually getting involved. And there's so much public support for the bill because people are literally starving in the streets without it, which means you can always extend across our uniqueness. Your non-uniques don't really work. Yeah.
Say the public is like, this is the most important.
Yeah, additionally, public thinks that this is the most important issue because people are literally without the unemployment benefits and they're losing their jobs at the second in the status quo, which means that this is the most necessary. There's nothing else on the docket. CIR definitely isn't. Too bad we read another non-unique. On the links. You say, turn, we break gridlock, however we isolate that you actually increase the gridlock in a world where number one, you fracture Democrat support for the bill because you take away from the solidarity that the Democrats are going. They're trying to, ahead of the midterms elections, they're trying to appear as unified force, but in a world where you turn back the space rhetoric, the rhetoric from the Democratic Party, and specifically from Obama, has been that they're actually decreasing the amount of space intervention in the status quo because things like the UN are solving back, which we'll get to on solvency, but in a world where you actually turn this back, this is always going to be stopping Democrats and it's going to be looking like the Democrats are turning back, and a world where it's always going to piss the Republican Party off. But additionally, the Democrats are always going to withdraw their support from the bill because it fractures the support of the Democratic Party. That was not linked to your turn. Doesn't really work. You say that you reallocate the existing funding power in the world. This is always perceptually viewed as the Democratic Party going back on their word and reversing the status quo, which means that even if you just reallocate the existing funding, that's not what it's painted as in the media. That's not what it's painted as in Congress, which means you're and the GOP support is always fractured, which means they're always going to back out. There's no risk that the GOP wouldn't back out on this because their nominee has already been tested. They clearly don't care if people don't have their unemployment benefits. That's the status quo. You say that it's necessary for the economy, however, in a world where we're going to be winning arguments that your case isn't necessary for the economy because it doesn't solve for your impacts. You're always going to be across our link. You say no link, no one cares about space. However, in a world where space is one of the most polarized issues of the media, and this was actually one of the heartline issues, like in the 2012 elections with Paul Ryan and Mitt Romney always sparring against Obama, talking about how we needed space military, we needed nuclear space, and how Obama was just consistently cutting this as a heartline issue, which means that the Paul Ryan only wanting rockets you can extend across that war, and it decentralizes the support because it always means that you always trip this heartline issue. People do care about space. That's not a good no link. On your second no link, you say that there's no spending increase. However, well, that's not what our links are talking about. We're talking about the perception of reallocating the funding and changing the policy agenda, which is always going to be splitting this. You push this off the docket, which means that you're always going to be tripping the link, which means you definitely even if there's no spending increase. You say term basically you say you make Republicans happy because the decrease are keto lunches. The Republicans are unhappy that the Democrats are going. Number one, this gives the Republican Party fuel against the Democratic Party in the midterms, which means they are always not afraid to walk away. The only reason that they're not walking away from the table right now is because they think because they're looking for bipartisan coalition. However, in a world where they think they can smear the Democratic Party enough by this turn in perception, this means that they're always going to be going for this in the status quo. Which means additionally, they don't want the degrees cleaned up in a world where the Republican Party doesn't really. For Paul Ryan specifically says that he wants more rocket launches, more militarization of space, not necessarily the cleanup. Which means that in a world where this is actually how the Republicans see it. I don't care if the degrees are scientifically key to it. It doesn't mean the Republicans just want the rocket launches and the military technology, not the cleanup. You don't increase the military technology, which means Republicans are going to do it on our internal links.
Yeah. Talk about how Paul Ryan is like the biggest financial.
Yeah, and Paul Ryan is the biggest financial Republican. He's specifically key to the financial talks, which means it's probably a good idea to be listening to him on his rhetoric, because the Republican Party thinks he's like one of the top contenders for 2016 on our internal links. You can put it in link. You didn't put it in the ink here. Extend across the people are literally starving right now, and they won't even get to choose between food or medicine because people are literally thriving off of unemployment benefits, and this is the worst type of structural violence. It's supposed to be outweighing our case because these people literally don't have the unemployment benefits and status quo, and more people are losing their jobs by the instant, which means that you're always going to be preferring our impacts. But additionally, you can extend across that this is the propensity to solve the economic clause and the investor fight that always causes resource wars, because this is something that's specifically key to the United States economy and our perception abroad. Politics flat out ways, especially in a world where your case doesn't solve. Let's go there now. Advantage 2. Number one, where you argue that the disadvantage outweighs, but additionally, you actually your links are as we're going to be winning on our status quo arguments on your solvency. Your links actually collapse the multilateral diplomacy that's happening in the status quo with like the United States, Russia, and the United Nations because literally we're actually acting unilaterally in a world where the status quo efforts are already solving. We're already having these multilateral talks. Acting unilaterally probably is a bad idea. Additionally, this always means that you never access your hegemony arguments because it's always going to be destroying international cooperation. And cooperation and communication. Advantage 1. My first argument here is that you said basically you just tried to relate this kind of like too bad you kicked it. My argument here is that number one, you're not going to be solving for space junk and a world where you talks of the status quo because status quo is always solving. You only have a risk of messing this up by acting unilaterally, which means that you can't solve for space junk. International cooperation is specifically key. And the world where the United States isn't the only one who has military, who is creating space debris, and not the only one who has the technology to monitor it. International cooperation, which is happening in the status quo, is specifically key. Unilateral action only has a risk. Yeah.
Our no solvency takeout is that the technology is not there, which means you.
Our argument is that the technology of the United States isn't there, which means that you can never solve for it. But let's go to the solvency sheet right now. Yeah, I'll go to the bottom solvency, bro. Alright, solvency. My first argument is that you're not really paying attention to you say basically that NASA says no action, that there's no action, but in a world where China and Russia are always increasing their space efforts right now. China and Russia have both been building more bases, and the UN just put out this new outer space treaty last fall, which means that the UN is solving in the status quo. In a world where you don't have the technology in the United States specifically to solve back for all of the space debris, which we isolate is specifically key, unilateral action can never solve. You always have to go with the UN efforts that are happening in the status quo. The U.S. looks like it's walking away from these efforts, and if we act unilaterally, and additionally, you never have any solvency because the international cooperation and communication is always key. You have no solvency here because you don't access the international cooperation that's happening in the status quo. You only have a risk of messing that up by the United States acting unilaterally. But additionally, Richard Carter from NASA analyst says that extracting the junk from space unilaterally is always going to be increasing the risk of collision if you aren't cooperating with international entities, because unilateral action always means that it looks like you're acting alone. You're not actually accessing the UN. Yeah.
that's not the argument. The argument is that all these space agencies are working together right now
Yeah,
to understand how to stop
Yeah,
it. We don't know
the
how
space
to do
agencies that
that.
are working together right now actually have an understanding of how to stop this. In a world where your uniqueness was never actually predicted of the U.S. and the UN and Russia working together, this always means that you only have a risk of messing up and increasing the collisions because you never actually have the space agencies that are working together in status quo. Your unilateral action doesn't solve, and status quo is already solving, which means you only have a risk of tripping up the unemployment benefits system, which we isolate as outweighing your case. You never touch our internal links, and the status quo is specifically solving with the UN Outer Space Treaty. Probably a good indication that the UN's doing it.
I'm digging the hoodie.
What?
I'm really digging the hoodie.
No,
Right?
thanks.
With the baseball cap under it.
Okay, the order is going to be
I can't remember.
an overview,
We're in California now, too.
Chinese nationalism. I'm joking. Politics, and
What
then
the fuck?
the case in order. We're collapsing to something else.
Screw it. Split the block.
There are actually two teams in here right now.
Yeah.
Jonathan and Catherine.
Okay,
I
so
fucking
you're
hated
doing
that
a-
last speech,
an
especially.
overview and then and then ticks?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You not get me sick, that'd be awesome.
Is everyone good?
You're going to be running negative for a couple of reasons, really easy reasons if I might add. Under magnitude, there's one issue. You concede our internal link to resource wars, which means we have the biggest impact going in the round at the point where you flat out concede our internal links. We have 100% probability to reach the magnitude and the weight of resource wars, which means the status quo is the only way to solve for that. Under NAVA 2, you concede that we also lead to structural violence if you pass the plan, which means the exact same impacts happen, plus you can hedge against that the status quo is solving because we don't know how to engage the space debris yet, which is what the international community is trying to do with all these agencies coming together. You hijack all that coalition of information and intelligence sharing and just go up there like the blatant idiot redneck American trying to solve everything because we can, but we don't know how yet, which is why it'll make it worse. Under probability, there's two reasons. Number one is the technology is not there. You can see that, which is why all these space agencies are trying to work together on the issue. You just go past all the information sharing and intelligence sharing as to how I actually solve this, and you just go up there, which always makes the problem worse. We have a lot more warrants. You're just really blippy on your solvency. You literally only have assertions. The number two argument is that you can see that the Republicans are becoming budgeting hawks, and they're making any excuse to blatantly smear the Democrats, which gives us enough blanket scenarios to why you not only make the status quo go in the wrong direction, which is headed in the right direction, but there's another brink scenario where you piss off the Republicans and give them a smear campaign, which makes it 2 times worse. Either way, we can win on both thresholds. Politics. I want you to extend the number one that it doesn't matter that CIR is absolutely not going is not being highlighted before the unemployment. There's a couple reasons. Is that number one right now CIR is completely fractured going into separate committees, but the next one is that the people are highlighting these vital issues. I just want you to extend everything Kay says as to why the unemployment is being highlighted right now, and also how this substantiates our argument that the Republicans don't care about the unemployment and they don't care about your extinction of the midterm arguments because they already would have cared. They already would have passed it because they already expired, which gives us enough brink as to why the amount of apathy the Republican Party has, and that's really all the non needs to go for, so we can just go ahead into the links. You say no link, no one cares about this. That's absolutely not care. As you can see how many times it was brought up in the Democrat-Republican debates in the 2012 elections. It's obviously a hot issue as to whether we're going to privatize, militarize the space, which is also why Paul Ryan has made a lot of strong rhetoric as to the only funding that will be actually given through Congress to NASA will be for the rocket launches. You give a huge surplus of funding for 20% of their funding for the cleanup of the debris. Paul Ryan is one of the biggest budgeting hawks who will absolutely use this to kill the coalition that's currently going on to pass the unemployment. But number two, he will also use this as a smear campaign against the Democrats, which will destroy the fact that they're working together, which gives us to our brink scenario, our internal links. You don't do enough work on our link scenarios to get out of it, especially because you're completely non-unique. But you're non-unique to make no sense. This gives us full access to our internal links of resource wars, which will always lead to a nuclear war. But furthermore, we don't even need that because you can see that we also lead to structural violence after plain text, which means you have no way to win. On the solvency, I want you to go ahead and extend. Where's my solvency? I want you to go ahead and extend. The number one is that the UN and the US are working together currently in the status. Where's my solvency?
Well, I don't know. Didn't take it.
The UN and the US are currently working together on in the status quo, and Richard Calther said extracting junk from space right now, circumventing all this intelligence and information sharing, that how we're learning to stop all this debris will lead to increased explosions and collisions at a more severe rate, which means you go away in the opposite direction. You absolutely have no solvency because you hijack the movement that the US and Italian space agencies are making. You hijack the moment that the ESA is trying to solve for the mapping, because there's literally no mapping going on inside space, which means you have no information of where you're going to space. You only increase the collisions. You concede that. Your advantage are link turn. You have no advantages. You don't solve because you only increase the links. You don't map out space, but you go there anyways, which means the collisions are only worse. You concede that. You don't solve. You can vote there too.
I would like an overview at the top. Chinese nationalism, politics, solvency, satellite intelligence, and space junk. I didn't remember that. I can't remember which is which.
Can you say that for one more time, Jay?
Yeah. Overview, Chinese nationalism, unemployment benefits, solvency, satellite intelligence. I think that was advantage two-ish, more or less, and space junk. Advantage space junk. Couple of really easy ballots for Nevada today. The first problem that we're going to be seeing is that our internal link argument that we make on the Chinese nationalism argument doesn't actually deal with the way that they access their impact scenario. Means that we still get full access to all of our link terms, means that we are the only team that's going to be able to resolve this, means you're going to be voting for Nevada at that impact scenario. The second reason that you're going to be voting for Nevada is that unemployment benefits simply doesn't have a large enough impact to be able to outweigh the wars that are going to be caused as a result of the affirmative advantages, means that the affirmative team is going to be winning the debate today. Chinese nationalism. On Chinese nationalism, the only argument that they extend here is the no risk that the no risk of an ASAT being launched, but at the point at which their inroads to the impact scenario are coming out of the Chinese nationalism, leading to attacks on other countries, means that the ASAT doesn't matter, because your internal link that actually matters to your impact scenario is that China becomes so emboldened that it starts attacking. And when we have the link terms that are able to resolve this, you're always going to be preferring the affirmative team, because we're going to stop China from creating massive war between the United States and China as we make good on our security guarantees that we have always backed up into the past, means that we are going to be outweighing at this impact scenario at the point at which you say that this is going to spark war between the United States or between China and the rest of the world. Happy there, Corey? Yeah. Unemployment benefits. Couple of arguments that we need to look to here. The first argument that you can look to is you can extend their uniqueness point about how they're saying that Banner is a really huge supporter of this. When they've got Boner on their side, the fracturing probably isn't actually going to happen at the point at which this uniqueness is too strong for their link scenario. The next argument that you need to look to is that that passage is inevitable by the midterms. This course-specific analysis that even if it doesn't pass right now, it's going to pass a few years from now. And so what we need to do is be able to pass the affirmative plan in order to be able to check the problems that are going to be caused as a result of that. The next argument that you need to look to is that their link here is that there's a perception that reallocating funding is going to change our stance on space, but at the point at which all of that funding is already existent, and Corey points this out, there's just no chance that all of a sudden when we start to clean up a little bit of space junk, Republicans are going to go, you know what, we're finally done with poor people, let's fucking kill everyone. There's just no propensity for this to happen, to the point at which the risk is so minimal you're never going to be evaluating it over the affirmative advantages, particularly when their only argument is this solvency argument that we're going to be talking about in a minute. The next thing that you need to look to is that their impact scenario is just that there is some starvation in the United States, but this, again, is already happening, means that we are not having a risk of causing this, we're only having a risk of not solving this, but at the point at which the risk is so small on their link level, we're never going to be evaluating this over the affirmative advantages.
The turn to removing debris is key of rocket launches.
Huh?
The turn removing debris
right.
is off rocket.
Moreover, extend the key that removing the debris is key to rocket launches keeps Republicans happy, because Republicans like shit that blows up. Rockets are shit that blows up. Republicans are going to be happy about that. On to the solvency. Big problem when they collapse the solvency arguments here and make this a key part of their strategy, because these solvency arguments simply aren't true. Like, their argument is that the U.S. technology does not exist, but can extend everything that came out of the PMC about the United States Air Force Project Ortiz is the program that is actually tracking this and developed the technology that is going to be able to check back against this. Is the first way that we are ever going to be able to solve this. Moreover, the tracking technology that exists for tracking all of these little particles out there is run by the United States Air Force. Is the reason why the United States is probably able to solve entirely by itself with no one else's help. Is the reason why you're never going to be evaluating any of their solvency arguments, particularly when all of those arguments are present in the PMC.
Analysis that like the entire globe's mapping of space is run by the Air Force is completely new.
I'm not talking about mapping, I'm talking about tracking debris.
I mean, mapping and tracking is synonymous in the respective.
No, okay, like I see what you're going for, but what I'm saying is that in the PMC I describe how the United States Air Force is tracking this debris, how we track all debris that's greater than 5 centimeters in size. That's like, forget what it is, it's one of my uniqueness arguments somewhere.
So I have from the Aff that the U.S. does have this program that tracks all debris over 5 centimeters. I don't have that they collaborate with other international organizations, so
yeah.
That's what I will take moving forward. Does that answer your point? Okay.
The main point of the argument here is that the United States doesn't need to be able to collaborate with other organizations in order to be able to solve back for this, because the point at which we're tracking the most deadly debris, we're going to be able to check back against the most risky scenarios of impact collisions. It means that we're going to be able to solve back with the United States acting by itself. Moreover, the next argument that you can look to is that, oh, I think they make that somewhere else. We'll move on. You happy there, Corey? Yeah. Cool. Satellite intelligence. The only argument that they make here is that we're going to be collapsing multilateral support, multilateral diplomacy that exists in the status quo, but they ignore my second link argument that says that we are creating multilateral diplomacy through means of protecting the International Space Station. Comes out of the PMC, means that we're never going to be evaluating this argument as anything important, because at the point at which we are protecting the International Space Station, we tell you that this is important to the space programs in other countries. That you're never going to be evaluating any of their argumentation as a reason why the advantages are not going to be able to solve. Are you happy there, Corey?
Yes.
Advantage, whatever, space junk. The only argument here is that we're going to be collapsing the talks that are going to that are like international support is going to be key, but to the point at which we extend or we can cross-apply that second link argument that comes out of the PMC that says that we create more multilateral diplomacy by means of protecting the International Space Station is the reason why you're never going to believe this. All they say is that these other countries are going to be mad if the U.S. does something, but at the point at which we tell you we're protecting other countries out of the PMC is the reason why you're never going to be evaluating this. We probably do it best, means that you need to evaluate our impact scenario first. Our impact here goes to like killing all the poor people. We should probably stop that.
I think this round gets interesting, and I hear really strong arguments coming out of both teams. I also hear contradicting arguments coming out of both teams, and I feel like there are a number of places in the round where we want to have a greater focus on round vision, because we're making arguments that might make sense in that spot on the flow, but don't make sense with the overarching statements that you're making throughout your speech. Does that make sense? And that's coming from both teams, and I can give you examples of that later. When it comes to the affirmative case, I think there are all these arguments about disrupting relations and therefore increasing the risk of collisions because we aren't collaborating with people, right? I think that there is a risk of that, and I think that mitigates the impact of your advantages. And I'm kind of in this tricky situation where I'm still getting all the link stories to your advantages, so I get to your impacts, but that means that if things go bad, they go super bad, right? Like if I'm giving you the link and internal link access to get to these things, like if China's going to get so excited about it, it also means China would get really pissed off if it went bad and more collisions happened, right? So what I'm not hearing is enough arguments back and forth about which one of those scenarios is more likely. Are we more likely to see a collision or more likely to go successfully? Because that is going to determine who gets access to the impacts. I want to talk just a little bit really quick about the Neg strategy. So I understand the overall story of the TICS-DA. I do not understand a specific link between space and unemployment.
Right.
What I think this is a very generic position, and it's missing any reason why this is where they would turn. Especially if you're making an argument that it's incredibly popular publicly. Why would the Republicans choose to backlash here? Why would anyone choose to backlash against a very publicly supported bill?
Right.
They would choose to backlash somewhere else. Make that argument. So I think that if you're going to run ticks, you need to have some link that's like, this is why this is the exact bill they would choose.
Yeah, for sure.
I also think that this reallocation of existing funding thing gets tricky. I know that, who was it, Paul Ryan makes this argument that it should be just for rockets, but there is an argument coming out that's saying if Obama, instead of spending more money, says we'll work within the funding we've already allocated, that will appeal to the Republican base, right?
Right.
Is there an argument, Kate, that comes out of your speech that says that the Democrats are then going to get upset?
Well, no, like part of it is that the Democratic support, like the reason it fractures the support, the bipartisan support, is that the Democratic support for it gets fractured because they have the solidarity behind Obama's current stance on like drawing back from space.
Right. So and this is one of those examples, so I think that that's a really good argument, but when it's made in conjunction with like the Republicans, there's a really popular bill, but this random thing with space is going to piss off the Republicans and the Democrats at the same time.
Right.
They wouldn't politically use it against each other if they were both pissed
Right,
off.
totally, yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
So I would be careful making an argument. You definitely want one party to be upset.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think that y'all are doing a good job making the reallocation argument, but I think you could have spent more time there. Corey, in your speech, you go into this, this impacts to your turn about like consumer spending and things like that. I don't think you need that because you can impact their scenario. I think you need to spend more time focused on why the reallocation would be supported. Like, yeah, they said rockets, but all of these reasons. And we can talk about who won or lost the round if y'all want to. I'm giving you both feedback, both on things that happened in the round and things I think you should think about in general, because I think that will best prepare you for nationals.
Yeah, for sure.
Finally, China. So this gets tricky. So there is this uniqueness overwhelms the link, like nationalism is increasing no matter what. But the turn, since it's a link turn, that the U.S. and China relations will increase,
Right.
that it can't be kicked without addressing that turn. Because if nationalism is strong now and it keeps getting stronger,
Right.
that doesn't help your impact scenario, like we're already going uphill. But if they say, no, we reverse it and it turns around and goes the other direction, and China starts to go along with the U.S. and nationalism decreases, that is a turn that needs to be addressed before you can kick the position. All of their other arguments you can ignore, but that one turn...
Right. So does the extension of the interlink argument that there's no risk that they do such a massive attack because of the backlash, does that not address that turn?
Because of what backlash?
Like the backlash, like the China, there's no risk of them going to the Japan conflict. That was the interlink argument I extended, the defense of the interlink.
Yeah, I don't... So you spend all this time outlining this scenario, and then they basically say, like, no, there's no real risk of attack, that's not really going to happen, and then you say, okay. And this is something that happens in debate rounds, which is all of those arguments that you've already put out there, it doesn't matter who said them, are already there.
Right.
So when they get up and they kind of extend those across and say, we have a risk of this happening, the defense isn't going to be enough.
Okay, for sure.
You need to deal with the offense on the position or have offense back.
Okay.
But if you give me a bunch of reasons why it's going to happen and they say, no, probably not, and then you say, okay, no, probably not, there's still a risk, right?
Right,
It's the same
sure.
way an advantage would work.
Sure, yeah, for sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so I do think, Jacob, in your speech, I want to see just a little bit more of the comparison and the time frame. I actually thought, Corey, you were making good time frame arguments at the beginning of your speech. about like this is why we have to do it now. If we wait for the international collaboration, something could hit and everything could like go to shit, and we need to do this immediately. So Jacob, I think more of that can come out in the PMR. Jonathan, I thought your LOR was one of the best speeches I've seen you give.
Thank you.
I thought you did very well. I haven't judged, I don't even know when the last time I watched y'all is, and I've only seen you two a couple of times. So I was really impressed with everybody. I thought that speech was very strong for you, Jonathan. And we can talk more about it later. I want to give you like 3 minutes before the next round starts. I guess we're in here now, but yeah, I thought that I just finished. Good round.
Thank you.